Recuerda ya. Hey. Good afternoon, y'all. Happy Friday. Okay, here we go, y'all. Friday afternoon guest episode number 2. Hey. Hey.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. How's your week been?
It's been good. Today I did like some cute painting with a friend on Zoom.
Okay.
And I made some like lemongrass mint tea. It was just very magical. We made like breakfast together and made delicious beverages together. And then we did watercolors. We talked about like obsidian. It was like we just covered
Love it.
the spectrum of like we cried together. It was just a lot. It was beautiful. So that was today, and my week has been good.
No,
How about you?
it's been good. It's been good. I've gotten out to enjoy some of the sunshine, so
Yes.
I feel like that's always the best medicine for me. Um,
Yes.
I feel rejuvenated, and I've been so excited all
Yes.
week, getting excited for today. I'm so excited
Same.
to get to close out my Friday, getting to speak with you.
Yes. Same.
Nice. So in the background, I always have a little music to start these IG live sessions, just to like, get us all in
Yes.
the mood. So I don't know if you know Ibeyi. It's a twins, um, Afro Caribbean French twins, and this song is called
Cute.
Me Voy. Um,
Yes.
so I'll make sure to include the link when we share this IG live, so folks can go back to it. But
Mm,
yeah, so thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so
of course.
excited to do this live with you. Everybody who's tuning in right now, welcome to your Friday. Welcome to the second episode of our guest series. We're super excited to be hosting Virgie Tovar today. Virgie is an author, an activist, and one of the nation's leading experts and lecturers on weight-based discrimination and body image. She writes for Forbes, dope. Was named one of the 50 most influential feminists by Bitch Magazine. Okay, girl, I see you. The founder of Babe Camp, which we will find out more about hopefully. But Babe Camp is a 4-week online course designed to help people who are ready to break up with diet culture. All about that, and definitely very much in line with what we talk about at About Face. And she started the hashtag campaign, hashtag lose hate, not weight, which was part of a TED Talk, which that TED Talk, that entrance to that TED Talk, your introduction to that TED Talk, there's just something about the theatrics of how you came in, the creative choices that you made, and the way you really
Yes.
called us to attention. Like I felt that. I was like, whoa, you just stopped me in my tracks. And I think that there's a way that I've witnessed you do that, that I think
Mm.
is just, you have a way of hooking people, which is really fantastic. And you also expect us to show up as our best selves, right? And to show up, to really show up. So thank you for that. So shout out
Mm.
to your TED Talk. And I haven't gotten a chance yet to listen to your podcast, Rebel Eaters Club, but it's now on my to-do list after some of the research I did this week. So I'm excited about that.
Mm.
Um, and also I want to add, a Virgie is a Taurus. Has a tarot
Yes.
deck that gets brought up in the book, which is great. And I love what you share on your Instagram. Just recently
Mm.
you shared the rosemary limeade recipe to uplift spirits, and I was like, oh, thank you for that. Thank you for
Yes.
read that. So
Oh.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to promote your book today, The Self-Love Revolution, Radical Body Positivity for Girls of Color. And just saying your introduction, dear person reading this, hello. I was like, I'm here. I'm hooked. What's up? What is the book going to be about? I'm here. What's good? So yes, again, just that way you have of hooking people. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us today. And I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, you say it took a long time to start writing this book, and that there was a lot of procrastination around it. Why is that? Or, how was the experience of writing this book? Who are you writing this book for?
Yes. I mean, okay, so I mean, I'm going to answer that,
Of
and I
course.
wanted to kind of name like gratitude for giving
Mm.
me the opportunity to debut this like puff sleeve dress that I'm wearing.
Ooh, yeah,
And also, I was like, I'm going there, and I'm wearing like my gold.
I love
I got my
it.
gold eye going, and then I have my enormous chunk of rose quartz. It's
Mm.
here with us today to remind us always that, like, to center love and to always have the intention of healing the heart.
Yes.
Um, I think today is a really heavy day, and it's been a heavy week.
Mm.
And I think, I've been thinking about my work, and some of the reason why it took me so long to start the book is connected to what's going on in our country right now around like George Floyd and like and the protests and people's response and um like the tweet, like the presidential tweet, the threatening of violence, right? And I think that essentially it took a long time to start the book, and I couldn't understand at first why, but I interrogated that, and I realized that it had to do with grief.
Mm.
And it had to do with the fact that I had to grieve some part of my own girlhood and the experience of being a girl in a country that's not set up to help girls thrive.
Mm.
I think what's interesting is there's a lot of like mythology that we as a country support girls. And I think that there is, I mean, certainly if you're going to talk about gender issues, it's easier to galvanize people around children, young girls, than it is to galvanize them around women.
Mm.
But I think the reality stands that that girl who we're so excited to see, like, be strong and all that, like, she is still more likely to experience sexual assault than to experience, like, than to be the boss at her job, right? Um, and so, what is the world that we're creating for these people, these little people who are and teenagers, right? Who are who were so gassed about, now what happens between that transition from them being children to them being adults, where we go from like being gassed about them to then abandoning them and actually attacking them culturally.
Yeah.
And so, right, like the book is about girls of color in particular, and I think there's so much mourning and grief that we need to do for girls of color right now, for those of us who are like women of color now, our own childhood, right? And so I think the enormity of that, taking that on, was what I had to do to be of service in this book. Was to really take on not only that was kind of the first really intense block. It's very
Mm.
hard to be sad.
Yeah.
And if it's like it's very draining to be really sad and to grieve, which is why so many of us don't grieve over the things that have happened and the things we've witnessed. Um, and I think the next thing was what is the hope for the reader? And that's also another thing, right? Like, I mean, there could have been a million hopes, right? Like, one hope could have been that they will come out of this understanding what, like body image is, or they will come out of this understanding what beauty ideals are. Or, I mean, there's so many possibilities that any one of them would have been fantastic. But I had to figure out what mine was. For this work, and I realized that it really had to do with a couple of things. Like, first of all, really imparting and sharing with girls a vision for a world that they create, right? That like that is like, how do we as adults clear the way so that these visionaries can create the world that they're seeing, right? That they want to see. And because I want to live in that world. I don't want to like, I don't necessarily, I mean, like, I don't necessarily, I think I have like style and I'm cute and all that stuff, right? But like, I'm more excited about the vision of any one of the girls this book is written for. I'm more excited about them being the architect of a world than me necessarily. So I definitely see my job as an adult to kind of keep them safe,
Yeah.
and to prepare them for stuff that they're not anticipating. Because, right, like my job as an adult, our job as adults is to maintain children's innocence. And that has to be like our number one thing that we care about, right? Because like for as long as they're able to, right, because for me, like innocence is about like safety, it's about creativity, it's about like, giving them the container so that they can be as big as the biggest version, the brightest version of themselves. And so this book, the vision of the book was really about like power, really imparting the sense that you are so powerful. And the reason why people teach girls of color in particular to be so afraid of their bodies and to hate their bodies is because that power, when it's not controlled, is just, it has the potential to ripple out into history and change the galaxy, right? Like to
Right.
change the literal structure of the cosmos.
Exactly.
And I think the other thing, one of the things was like racism, that racism took from me and that racism takes from all people of color. And I think the darker you are, the more you experience this. But it really does steal away the sense that you're inherently good. That there is a person there, no matter what you have to go through, no matter what like you go through and who it has to turn you into, right? Because like when we go through violent, awful things, we become guarded. We create boundaries. And sometimes we don't always know exactly how to create them in a way that's like gonna leave room for us to grow and be vulnerable in meaningful ways. But I think as we go through those traumas, and certainly like again with girls of color in particular, the combination of racism, rape culture, sexism, it creates a reality in which like that sense that you're an inherently good person, it gets lost. And so I really wanted to sort of push home that at the end of the day, that we're all inherently good people, that racism seeks to steal that away from us, and that also no matter what, no matter how boundaried we have to be in order to navigate this world, because certainly if you're like a trans girl or you are a darker skinned girl or you are any kind of like, a number of kinds of girls who are particularly targeted, you're going to have boundaries in this world. And so, right, no matter what we have to do in order to survive this world, to never lose sight of the fact that there's like a soft, squishy person inside. And that like even if we can only show that person to ourselves, to never lose sight of her, and so like that was, so I mean it took in like that's like a very ambitious project for just one book, and so like to kind of coalesce all of that and to put it onto the page somehow is a big undertaking. So yeah.
That's beautiful. All of that. And thank you for naming where we are and what things are today. I think there's a lot in your book that I feel like you just don't hide from things, and I think that there's an importance to that, right? To speaking the truth of the moment. And what do you think that looks like right now? Grieving and continuing to honor the magical bay from within for our girls of color during a time of state violence, police violence, but also being sheltered, right? Being sheltered in place and being at home. What are some things that you think are important for folks to remember about this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is actually um, leaning into, like, really listening to what you're drawn to do in this moment, right? Because we need all the different kinds of strategies. We need the person who is like, I just need to cry for 3 months straight. And we need the person who's like, I'm going to mobilize. This is how I'm doing that. And we need the person who's like, I'm doing every person's nails who's mobilizing. And we need the person who's like, I'm going to draw this experience. We need the documentarian, the person who's going to photograph it, the person who's going to write about it, the person who's going to write poetry about it, right? It's like, I just sort of think that there's room for our authentic response to things. We need that multiplicity, and there's room for it. And I think that right there, I mean, one of the biggest critiques of like action and politics is like that there's this hierarchy of like, oh, this is the best kind of organizing. This is going to get the most results, right, if we do this. And I mean, certainly we know from history there are certain political methodologies that get a lot of action, right? That actually get things done. Like I often refer people to look up like ACT UP, right? Like the sort of this like really famous queer organizing, political rabble rousing like organization, right? And ACT UP was so great at like getting results, and they use the media really, really intelligently. Like they learned how to okay, how am I going to get 10 press outlets to this event? Okay, how are we going to do that? Because we need to get national media attention on this. So there's absolutely, like, there's a reality that there are certain mechanisms that get more political change done more quickly. But what we forget is like activism and politics are a lifelong pursuit. So it has to be a practice that's nourishing. It has to be a practice that gives you joy, right? Understanding that there's going to be moments where things are hard, like it might not be joyful in that moment, but like at the end of the day, it has to be a practice that feels really, that feels like it fills your cup up and doesn't always just take, like it doesn't always feel like work. And so, I think like for us during like this moment around like racial violence and police violence and murder, and also around shelter in place, I've been seeing girls have a multiplicity of reactions to it. And they're all amazing, right? Like, I mean, like, there's the girls, like, I did a talk with a bunch of girls a few weeks ago, and, one of the people was, she was like, she was really focused on mental health, and there was another person who was like, I'm really focused on taking care of my parent right now, who's in a really vulnerable position and in a vulnerable population, and there was another person who was like, I'm going to do this, I need to dance, right? Like I dance and that's what I do and that's what I share. And so I think like, and again, and like in the book, I talk about leaning into intuition, right? Like our job on this earth is to clear away all of the stuff that obstructs our relationship to ourselves. Because that knowledge that our body is telling us is sacred. And so each one of us has a personality, each one of us has a voice, each one of us has a way that we do a thing when things get hard. And it's okay to like lean entirely into that. And I think I'm going to give an example for me. Like I was just recently taking this class on ancestor work and like, healing our bloodline, which I think a lot of people, girls included, may not even call it that, but they are drawn to doing that work. And I was finding like, I went to the class and I was finding myself feeling kind of reluctant. And I was also like in the class and I was kind of being like, okay, I got it. Like, yes, this is how you make an altar. This is what you wear when you're doing this. This is how you address the ancestors. And I was like realizing that during the workshop, I was realizing, oh, the reason I'm not drawn to it is because I'm not going to ever do that thing that way. Like, I'm going to honor my ancestors by like wearing glitter nail polish, and if I'm going to have an altar, it's going to be ho-hos, glitter nail polish, some
Yes.
pink stuff, right? Because the other thing is, right, I think there's like, I was thinking about this, like the people I have done workshops with around ancestor communication and like healing, all of them had very particular methods. They were very serious, and it was just a lot of like, not my vibe, right? Like, I'm not a serious person. Like, I just kind of like, I like play, I like sparkle. And sort of just being like, no, it's not that there's not room for me or I'm doing it wrong. It's that I need to lean into how I want to do that thing. And even if there's no other model for that, I can create that model and lean all the way in, because you know what? My ancestors aren't just up there wailing in rebosos, right? They like want to dance. They want flowers. They want to hear some chisme, right? Like they have all of the complexity. All of us have been through horrible stuff. Yes, they went through colonialism. Yes, they went through sexual violence. Yes, they went through war, right? But so have we. Like, we're in this right now too, and we know that we're out here looking cute and stuff. So like, I don't believe that on the other side of the veil, that like they're not doing some equivalent of the complexity, living the complexity that we live on this veil. Anyway, that's my answer. Like, yes.
Love that. I think that's been spoken a lot, that also ancestors respond to like our vibrant colors, right? I've heard that.
Yes.
Bring in and for me to be transparent of my choices for today, I chose this vibrant top because I knew I was going to talk to you. So I knew, like,
yes,
you're like, I'm glitter and, colors, and that resonates with me, with just how you present yourself, right? And even though you and I were still getting to know each other, I felt that. And I was like, I'm wearing something bright today.
Yes.
And I think that, I want to lift up two questions that you bring up in the book. You say, like, when you find yourself at a crossroads, ask yourself these two questions. Does my body deep down like this? And does this honor the magical babe that I am? And I want to lift that up as beautiful questions, especially for girls of color, right? Like, especially for we're talking about movements, you're talking about activism, and you're talking about the long haul, and the fact that this is a marathon. When you really look at movements, most movements are led by the sisters, right? By the queer and trans family, right? And a lot of the times we're the ones who carry the weight of the work, right? We're the ones that show up early, and we're the ones that stay late. And so what does it mean to preserve the innocence of these young girls, but also to just, lift them up and teach them to lean into that. So I just again, one of those moments that caught my attention, and I want to I want to shout out your book, right? I want to shout out the book. Again, is called The Self-Love Revolution: Radical Body Positivity for Girls of Color. And I'm actually, there it is. And I'm actually I've been reading it off of a PDF, so I'm actually going to buy myself a copy. And I challenge everybody who's watching right now to do the same thing. If you haven't bought yourself a copy yet of Virgie's latest book, please do. And we'll make sure to promote things. But how's the book? How's it been? Have you gotten some responses from folks who've been reading it? From some girls? What has the response been to your words and to your work?
Yeah, I mean, what's been interesting, there's been a few different kinds of responses. Like I'm going to start with the industry because I think it's useful. Like, the publishing industry has responded really well to it. Like, it's gotten fantastic reviews from all of the most, like, the big sort of reviewing sort of bodies, right? Like Publishers Weekly and stuff like that. So it's been really beautiful to kind of, see that signal boosting happening in those very traditional spaces. And then, like, Barnes and Noble bought a very, very large order of this book. And so it's exciting from, like, a professional standpoint to be like, wow, like, this is really validating. And it's also exciting to see that, again, it's not just, right, like, for instance, a little bit of, like, an aside is, like, I had a meeting with the Gina Davis Institute on media representation, and I was reading a bunch of their work, and they've shown that media that have women and girls and people of color at as lead actors actually gross more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's like, you know what? We're not just out here being like out in the
We're
fringe, just
not.
like doing this little with like five of us. There's like there's actual outcomes attached to this representation and this conversation. And so I think it's hard to sometimes remember that it's not just like, we're not just like conversations that center people of color or women and feminine people are not just things people do out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Like there's actually like, this is what people want to see. This is what people want to hear. This is what people want to read. And so I think that's like useful. And then in terms of like talking to girls, I've mostly been able to, at this point, mostly getting reactions from adults who work with girls or moms or aunties and things like that. And what I've loved about it, and I think it's a little bit of a surprise for me, they're really healed by it, right? Like they went in looking for tools to help their like little person in their life or their teen or their therapy client or whatever. And they felt really seen by the book, and they felt really like they walked away with tools, and they walked away with a sense of like being a babe, you know? And that made me really, really happy, because I think that's right. Like that healing that we do for one is the healing we do for everyone, right? You know, I just thought it's just so beautiful. That was very much at the heart of why I wrote it, and how I wrote it, and it's so beautiful to see that kind of ripple.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the responsibilities as educators. If we're going to be
Mm,
working to heal the youth, we got to do our own work. And sometimes one comes before the other, and sometimes it's this beautiful, in parallel synchronicity. Um,
yes.
so yeah, well, I'm so glad that you're getting that, because that's you could feel that. You could feel that that's the intention you have when you're writing the book.
Mm.
So I consider myself, to be well versed when it comes to concepts and terminology around movement and justice. I've been in this game for a minute, but then I read body justice, and I was like, you know
Mm,
what? Stop. I definitely have never used this term, and I don't think I've
mm.
I've heard it. And can you tell me a little bit more about body justice? If especially for folks like me who think they got it, but really, we learn something new every day. So tell me about body justice, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think like my introduction to like body justice. I mean, right, I think you would get different answers depending on who you were talking to. So I'm going to give you my answer, but like know that it's one of many. So for me, my introduction to body justice was really around fat activism. So I have been a fat person my entire life. Like I was born into a fat family. I was a fat baby, and I became a fat adult. And I use the word fat. I know a lot of people have been taught that word is rude and hurtful. And honestly, that word was used to hurt me and silence me for a very long time. And it still hurts when someone says it in a really clearly in a mean way to
Mm,
me. But it's a term that I was introduced to within a political context, as a way to reclaim the word and reclaim my body. And I think also, right, like using the word fat has been really powerful because it takes back the power, when you're having an interaction. Because when you're a fat person interacting in a thin world or within people, there's always kind of the looming threat that they're going to use that word, to hurt you. And it's kind of like, it's just like there in the air, you know? And I think that and in marginalized people in general know this thing where it's like the discrimination is probably going to happen. I don't know when, but it's kind of looming.
waiting for
And then,
it.
yes, and then when the marginalized person like throws the card down first and is like, and now I'm gonna take the power away from you, right? Like this situation is now in my control. I have thrown down the gauntlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've taken back my power in this moment. And so I think for me, like there's a lot of there. So there's that. So that's contextualizing like why I use that word. And anyway, so I was introduced to fat activism when I was in graduate school studying fatness. I was studying how body size and race affected gender. And I met this group of incredible activists. Most of them were queer. Many of them were people of color. And they kind of taught me, right, like that, first of all, that the attitudes that I was taught that my body was wrong and bad and ugly and unlovable, and because I'm fat, I'm never going to find a partner, I'm never going to find clothing that I like or whatever, all those kinds of things, that was injustice, right? Like that it was wrong that I was taught those things and that it wasn't my fault that they happened. And right now in our culture, people have really negative, bigoted attitudes towards higher weight people, but they don't see those attitudes and behaviors as bigotry. They see those attitudes and behaviors as natural responses to someone who they've been taught has poor health and like has the power to become a thin person if they tried hard enough. And what the research actually shows is that people's body size is largely genetically determined, not behaviorally determined. And also that, right, like that, like if you're a higher weight person experiencing discrimination all the time, that you're going to have poorer health outcomes than someone who isn't experiencing discrimination all the time. It's like, it's not like rocket science, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, there's a whole body of research called minority stress theory that talks about the physiological impact of being in a discriminated group. And if you're a higher weight person, certainly like one of the first things that discrimination does, and anybody who has experienced discrimination knows this feeling, is that you immediately feel it in your heart, right? Like you immediately kind of have that heart rate going up feeling. That is signaling, right? Like that something that's very clear in the science, which is that discrimination affects the cardiovascular system. So, right, there's all this research that's like, fat people are going to die before their time of a heart attack. And I'm like, you know, it's funny that like the very experience of being a higher weight person is so stressful because of fat phobia, and it attacks the heart, which is this very thing. I don't know. There's something really cyclical about all of it. And when you kind of start researching discrimination, you realize how cyclical all of it is. Anyway, so I went from being ashamed of my body and my fatness to being angry that fat phobia had happened and that it existed. And then I wanted to change it. I wanted to like, you know, change how we saw ourselves and change how different people's bodies were treated. And I think for me, it's the body justice part really comes in a few different variations, right? Like, so first of all, recognizing that there is no such thing as a bad body. Every body is a good body. And that includes people who have chronic illness. It includes fat people. It includes trans people. It includes people with disabilities. It includes people who have, you know, even like any number of things, like whatever your health status may be or whatever your body is doing or whatever it looks like, that it's valid. The next thing is that every single person deserves to live a life free from bigotry and discrimination, regardless of size or health status. I think another thing is like that body diversity is a good thing, right? Like, and I talk about it this way. A lot of people think that a fat person is a failed thin person, but a fat person isn't a thin person at all. And so, right, so it's kind of like there's this pretty massive miscategorization. I have a friend and somebody I really admire named Dr. Deb Burgard, and she has this amazing video called The Trouble with Poodle Science that she helped to make. And she's like, if you're fat, like everybody thinks, like she's like, okay, in our society right now, like let's just say we lived in a dog society, right? Like right now, the equivalent of our society would be that poodles run everything, and all the poodles go out in the world and they're not like, oh, there's a Rottweiler and there's a Chihuahua. They're like, there's a big poodle, there's a tiny poodle. That poodle's wrong. This poodle's not okay, right? And so, right, when you go out into the world with being like everybody's either a great poodle or a bad poodle or a just right poodle, you're going to really miscategorize the diversity of actual, like, these things aren't even poodles, right? And so for me, I'm like, I am a German Shepherd. I'm not a poodle, right? I never was a poodle. I don't have ambitions of being a poodle. And I have my own special strengths that come with being my kind of thing, right? In the same way that, like, poodles have their strengths, and I'm like happy to gas them and like be excited for them, but they don't get to be mean to me because I have my things. And so I think, like, thinking of body diversity in that way, where we're not all one failed or successful version of one thing, that we're all like these different things, is actually really exciting and wonderful and great. And I think the last thing I'm going to say about body justice is really understanding the connection between diet culture, which is kind of like, you know, this essentially we live in diet culture, right? Like a culture where people are expected to like restrict their food and to exercise in very particular ways in order to become a thin person in the hopes of becoming a thin person, right? Even though the research shows that a person who is naturally bigger, the chances of that person becoming a normal size or thin person is less than 1%. So the statistics are really clear that you can't take like convert a large-bodied person into a smaller-bodied person. But anyway, understanding that diet culture is really motivated by sexism and a lot by racism, right? Like our body ideal is based on a European white male who is able-bodied and cisgender. And really, like when you're talking about the poodle, like that's the poodle that we're all being compared to. And our medical system is unfortunately set up to compare every single person, no matter where they're from, to that model, that ideal, right? And the issue with that is we all know, like where we come from, when you're a person of color, you look like your ancestors. And if all your ancestors are like 5 feet tall and they're like stocky, you're gonna be around that height and you're gonna be stocky, right? In the same way that like you're gonna likely have the same hair color, the same eye color, the same facial features. And so we're never, ever, ever going to meet that standard, and we are medically and socially punished for having a body that isn't that. And that's a real problem because it leads to medical neglect, it leads to wage gaps, it leads to all these issues. So I mean, that was a long answer, but like to me, I mean, the sum up for me is like body justice is the idea that every single person deserves to live a life free from bigotry and discrimination with dignity, regardless of their size or their health status.
Girl, I'm going to rewatch this IG live so I could just take pen and just write everything you're saying. But I'm just be in the moment and rewatch. But I do want to let you know, because I'm not sure that you're seeing the comments, but one of the folks that's following or that's on the live right now says, your book, You Have the Right to Remain Fat, has changed my life. You are amazing, and a lot of hearts. And so I want to give you that. I just want to give you affirmation from somebody who's tuning in. And one last one, Virgie is always the most articulate when it comes to these subjects. So I don't know if you're seeing
thank you.
I want you to feel the love. And I want to uplift, I want to lift up a word, what you said around the fact that fat phobia is discrimination. And so this is me speaking to folks who have taken part in that, right? Who have taken part in cracking jokes and thinking that it's okay to crack jokes, or the way that you've been taught in a lot of ways by media to think that fat phobia is okay, right? And because this is discrimination, it calls for allyship. So the way that we move our programs is education into action. If we're educating you, it's because we're expecting you to take action on some of the things. And we talk to girls a lot about like critical thinking skills and leadership skills. But if you are an ally, if you are an accomplice to ending fat phobia, some of the things that you say in your book, you say we could decide right now, right, to stop making fun of fat people, to stop treating fat people poorly, to speak up when fat phobia happens, and we could end fat phobia overnight, right? And so I want to name that.
Yes.
That this is, when we're talking about discrimination, there's and bigotry. The other side of that is responsibility, right? Responsibility to end that discrimination and to show up as an ally. So
yes, and I think to that point, I think this is something that happens a lot in our culture where the person who is the victim is considered the perpetrator. And the same thing is right, the way that I learned fat phobia was like, I'm going to abuse you because you're fat and I have the right to do that. And you can make it stop by becoming a thin person. It is not my responsibility not to be a fat phobe. It is your responsibility not to be fat. And I think the same, again, to bring it to what's going on culturally in this moment right now, this idea that people who are calling out white supremacy are the ones who are considered the bother, right? The people who deserve to be punished and shut down, when in reality, all people are asking for is don't actively create systems and realities that where I can't navigate as a person and have dignity. And so I think it's important to, in that section of the book, I often remind people, I'm like, you know what? Even if I believed in fat, even if I was going to undertake becoming a thin person, which I am not, right? That process would take a very long time. And you can choose to stop being a bigot right now. Right. Instant results guaranteed. And so I think it's really frustrating when people, and I see it all the time in my comments and in comments and commentary on fat people all over the internet, is this idea. I swear, literally this week somebody just said just stop eating as many hamburgers, as if I'm sitting here dedicating my life to inconveniencing this person or something. But anyway, right, I'm all you have to do is not comment. Literally, you have to do less work to not be a bigot. You are opting into labor to discriminate against me, and you are acting like I am inconveniencing you. You have come to my page. You have had to follow me, meaning you have to press follow, right, in order to comment on my page. Then you had to type it all out. Right. And I'm you could have just been sitting at your house doing whatever it is that you were doing. But no, you have and so I think it's important to recognize that it's actually bigots who are doing the labor consistently to maintain systems that dehumanize people, and people who are the victims of bigotry and discrimination and oppression, we're just trying to live our best lives. That part. That's pretty consistently. It's you can actually stop doing that labor of violence, and I think we'd all be better off,
And you'll still be just doing your magical babe stuff.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And a couple of the things that you bring up an anecdote. I want to tie this into to how we've learned these ways, right? How we've been conditioned to believe in specific beauty standards, and also to think that we're all supposed to be poodles, which, oh my gosh, that analogy though, stop. I'm going to use that and quote you. But one of the things is you mentioned in the book a study from Common Sense Media, I think it was 2015 statistic, that 80% of 10-year-old girls have been on a diet, which is terrifying horrifying, and as you say, not surprising. And then you bring up an anecdote about a personal anecdote about getting your nails done, and right, that like rite of passage, which I think I resonated so hard with, because I think especially, I'm not saying like, you know, white women don't get their nails done, but there's something about the rite of passage in communities of color, of like your
Mm,
aunties and your cousins bringing you to that, like, okay, now you could do this. And that rite of passage of reading magazines that are geared towards women,
mm.
zombieing out, and not even thinking about how it made you feel, right? And so what are some of the things that you can speak to? I know in your book you break it down into 9 points around beauty standards to start, and how beauty standards fit into, you know, this notion of diet culture and whatnot. But where do they come from? How do they impact us in our day to day, from, you know, from your observations?
Yeah, I mean, there could be an entire day long about beauty standards. They're so complex, and that's not exactly my area of expertise, but like I kind of talk about it in the first thing I talk about, one of the most important things that when I learned this, and when I think it's really powerful when I share it in the book, because it really blew my mind, was that we learn who is beautiful from our society. When we're born into this world, I mean, certainly there's been plenty of research. I would say, like, I question the research that's like, no, babies look longer at this kind of person than this. I mean, I don't know. I'm like, I don't trust evolutionary psychologists and biologists, generally speaking, and those are the kind of people who are making those claims. But anyway, let's just say, like, in general, you know, children come into this world, and I mean, I don't know, some of us, I can remember being a child, a very small child, before I learned beauty standards, before I learned fat phobia, excuse me, and I saw the world in this incredible way. Like, everybody was beautiful and sparkly, and I could see their personality. Like, I could completely see it, right? And like every single one of them, every single person around me was so unique. And I loved every single person. There was no evaluation of like, this person's better than this person. I was like, I vibe with you really hard, and so I'm gonna like be close to you. But it wasn't like there wasn't a judgment attached to that, and I remember that very clearly. So anyway, but all that to say, like, most people believe that we are born knowing who is beautiful and who isn't beautiful, and that's a myth. We learn those things from our society. We learn them from a series of behaviors, from language, from media. We get rewarded socially for adhering to the beauty standards of our society, and we get punished. So there is absolutely nothing natural about any of it, right? Like, and I think when we sit down and think about what are the moments that taught me that this person is appealing and this person isn't, there would be hundreds of memories, hundreds, right? I mean, and so, and to kind of illustrate that, I want to share a couple of things. Like, to begin with, right, like when I was researching body size, trying to understand this issue in grad school, one of the most staggering things that blew my mind was that there were cultures in the world right now where a larger body is considered the most beautiful. So if we're speaking specifically about women, in our culture and in the West, the smaller you are, the more beautiful you are, generally speaking. I mean, certainly there's like microcosms where certain kinds of body types are more appealing, but in general, in the US, the body type that is considered the most beautiful is a very thin feminine body. But there are other cultures, right? Like, I specifically studied in Mauritania and Niger, parts of Niger, where the fat body type is considered the most beautiful. So the women who are likeliest to get married are the fattest women in the society, in the community. And this is such a big beauty standard that parents will pay older women in the society to help their daughters gain weight in order to make them more appealing for in the marriage market. And it, as a person from the United States, this kind of research is really mind blowing, right? Like, because it's like, wait, I thought every single person on the planet believed that thin people looked better than fat people. And there's basic information, right? A quick search is going to lead you to the fact that's not the case, right? And in these societies where fat women are considered the most beautiful, the men in those societies talk about them the same way that men in our society talk about thin women. They use the same language. They're like, it just feels better. It just looks better. It's just sexier. I don't know why anybody wouldn't like that. And so they use that same kind of almost like quasi-biological language to talk about their attraction to wildly different beauty standards. And there's another moment in the research that I like really blew my mind was that and I talk about this in the book, like where there's a journalist who's talking to the women in one of these communities, and at one point she like notices that there's a group of women gathered around in a circle and they're looking at something and they're laughing really loudly. And she goes over and is like, what is so funny? Like they're losing their minds. And she realizes that it's a Western magazine. They're laughing at the thin white women because they think that they look so funny, right?
Wow.
And so it's just like really staggering to kind of imagine like the different, like the 180, right? This is a completely different, like upside down land to the one that we grew up in. And so, right, like, and I think the last thing I'm going to say about beauty standards is like, certainly, like I've experienced, beauty standards and desire are different. That's another really big one that people don't know, right? And I want to use a personal example to kind of talk about this, right? So beauty standards are about creating a hierarchy. They're about like, who do I want to be seen with, right? And for a lot of people, who do I want to be seen with and who am I into, who I'm attracted to, have overlap, but not for everybody, right? Like, and I think like, and I'm like a perfect example of this, like as somebody who I've dated lots of people who had high desire for larger bodied and other kinds of like non-ideal women,
Right.
but were married or publicly attached to someone who was very adherent to the beauty standard. And I remember when I first moved to San Francisco, I was dating someone who was very, very, very enthusiastic about my body and was very clear about that. We had a lot of chemistry. It was one of the most electric relationships I ever had. And then when it came time to start going from casual dates to like more working, like joining each other's lives, he just said, he was like, listen, your body type is my ideal. I am very attracted to you, but my friends would give me so much shit if I dated you, and I can't handle it. I just can't. And I think like, I think it goes to show, right, like the system of punishment where it's like, you need to be with this kind of person and you're going to pay personally a lot if you are not with that kind of person. And the way that like society kind of structures itself in a way where certain people are just seen as valuable and certain people are not. And then there's this very sophisticated system around keeping that standard. And so that's a long answer, but I'm going to leave it there.
I could talk to you for hours. I'm like realizing we already have less than 10 minutes before this IG live cuts us off. But I'm like,
yes.
I haven't even gone through half of my questions because we have to talk about. But yeah, and I want to highlight that, right? That some of the ways that we're taught these things from like a media lens is really like, how was the first toy that you bought? How was it advertised? What cartoons did you watch as a kid? What movies do you watch now? What images do you see? You know, what advertisements do you see? And I know that you bring up this marketing, is kind of like internal lingo, like insider's view from the marketing industry of like selling to pain, right? Which we talk about, this like dissatisfaction cycle. We're like constantly taught to be dissatisfied with something, so we just keep buying and we just keep feeling like we're in this crazy feedback loop. And so again, I'm challenging everybody who's listening now and who will be listening later when this goes on YouTube. Please support Virgie, support her work and her words. Buy the book. There it is again. So
I have to do it. I have to do it.
and also, if you got a Venmo, let's make sure we include that in there. We really need to support people who are, you know, who are doing the kind of work that we're doing. And so I'll end it on a question around you know, speaking specifically to young girls, right? To young self-identified girls, trans girls, gender expansive youth, who are turning to you today as a role model, as a mentor, as an inspiration. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know, or what stories do you want them to share? What images do you want them to see? You can answer any part of that question, but essentially, what is your gift in words right now to the girls who may be tuning in now or later?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to encourage them to, again, like, listen to your body, right? Your body is giving you information all of the time. And your job is to clear out the noise, right? Because like when girls listen to their bodies, they have the potential to change history. They have the potential to change the world, right? So I specifically want to say that when we're talking about gender expansive, queer, trans girls and girls with disabilities, right? Like all these intersections of like girls of color, the girls who are sort of like at the margins of girlhood, whether it's because of gender or because of disability or any number of things, like those girls, like look to those girls to be the visionaries and the architects. Because right, like what's incredible, and this is something I talk about in the book, right, is like experiencing racism and sexism and any number of other things that you're experiencing. Those things are very difficult, but the experiences, the knowledge that comes from that's your magic.
Yeah.
Right? There is no magic without sacrifice. And I think that's what's so powerful. I remember learning that as like from other amazing witches. They're like, if you want something, the bigger the thing, the more you sacrifice. And I think what's interesting is like, it is a big, big price tag. Being marginalized is a huge price tag, but it comes, whatever the price tag is, we get that in magic. And so it's important to recognize, right, that like that magic looks different, right? For every different person, there's different magic. And I think for people who are living really at lots of marginalized identities, one of their biggest pieces of magic is that they are fantastic architects because they have the most perspective, right? Like when I think about it as birds, right? If you're privileged, you're on the ground. Like you're literally like crawling around on the ground. It's really hard to see how tall a tree is. It's really hard to see anything besides what's in front of you because you're like right there living on that plane as a privileged person. And then, when you're more marginalized, maybe you're like a finch. You're at the top of the trees and you're adorable and you make cute sounds. And you're like, oh my God, I see that tree. I see that thing over there coming. I see that shiny thing that's like 5 feet away that thing that's, the thing that's on the ground living its life can't see. And like, how cool is that? And then you get to a different level of marginalization. And maybe you're like, I don't like an eagle, right? Like an eagles and like these other like hawks, right? They can go really, really high, and they can see everything. And I kind of think about marginalized people. They have not, maybe they didn't opt into, they didn't maybe want to be an eagle, right? Maybe they would have chosen to be something else, but they get all of the magic of being an eagle, right? And
Right.
so how can we like honor that eagle babe and be like, listen, the eagle's the one who should probably be telling us how we need to be structuring our world because they're up there a mile up and we're like down here and we can't really see as well. So it's like, how do we kind of enlist our friends on every level, our eagle friends, our finch friends, our like little friends, our poodle friends, and just like be like, girl, this is your poodle task, and eagle
Right.
up here, you're a visionary.
The poodle's
And
gonna
so,
poodle too.
yes, 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 and so it's like, and I want to speak to that a little. Sorry, it's a little bit of
I
like
got you,
an
Virgie. I'm
aside, but
sorry. I hate to cut you off, but
oh,
we are at
oh,
18 seconds remaining, and
oh my
so
God,
I don't
okay.
want the video to cut you off, but maybe we can think about a part two to this conversation because there's
Yes.
more, and I just want to give you so much love and so much gratitude and so many thank yous for being with us today. It's been illuminating and so inspiring, and it's about